Good morning from Switzerland. Jim Fanell here, and it's an honor and privilege to be able to speak to the Committee on Present Danger China. I thank you, Frank, for the invitation, and I would just like to present a few pieces of information regarding updates on the PRC's activities here on the European continent. As you may have heard, the first female ever selected to head the European Commission, Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, was selected this week in Brussels. Ms. von der Leyen's recent experience was as the defense minister for Germany. And I think it's worth noting that on her watch here in the last week, that China just concluded its first ever exercise on German soil called Combined Aid 2019. This exercise was advertised as preparing troops with medical service units of the Chinese and German armed forces to respond to humanitarian crises such as mass casualty incidents and serious disease outbreaks, according to the Xinhua News. It was ironic that this occurred and it was touted as being a medical training exercise, but then upon the conclusion of the exercise, we learned that there was actually live fire activity that went on in the training of the exercise. There were some 90 Chinese personnel that had come to Germany to follow up on a 2016 exercise that had occurred in Chongqing. And in this exercise, not only were there live fires, there were armored vehicles. And the importance of this is not that it was about medical training per se, but about the ability to project power over thousands of miles across the Euro-Asian continent. And so I think this is worth noting. I think it's also worth noting that the Chinese went out of their way to say that they will use the PLA in the future to go abroad to protect China's overseas interests in the countries along the Belt and Road. And clearly they believe that Germany is part of that. And I have to say I also find it rather ironic and dismaying to see that a nation that imprisoned some 3 million people in Xinjiang in concentration camps was allowed to host a military live-fire exercise with armored vehicles on German soil, the same soil that saw concentration camps 80 years ago. And I think that the appointment of Ms. van der Leyen as the new head of the European Commission is something that we should take very seriously, and to be concerned about the outlook that we're seeing from some of our European allies as they address the PRC's influence in Europe, and specifically the PLA's influence and inroads into NATO countries. There were a couple of other items that I think are worth noting as well related to the PLA and things that are going on. It was reported on the 9th of July in China military reporting said that the German defense minister and the defense minister of Netherlands have signed an agreement to build what they call the Tactical Edge Networking, or TEN network. And TEN will be the first transnational military sharing internet between Germany and the Netherlands, and will make use of this network to achieve digital exchanges of multinational military information. The reason that's important is because we know that Huawei is pressing Europe right now to get inroads into European capitals and European commercial networks, but they're also aware that the United States, Secretary Pompeo, National Security Advisor Bolton have warned the EU and NATO about the implications of allowing Huawei into our secure networks in NATO. And so now we see a report that says that Germany and Netherlands are now signing an agreement to have their own special military, essentially intelligence network, separate from the United States. This should cause us some concern and realize that the amount of effort that's going on behind the scenes by the PRC and the PLA to split and divide Europe and NATO from the United States. And finally, I'd like to just point out that there was also another article in PLA Daily just yesterday where it talks about the French creation of a Space Force Command. And as the Chinese said, it may escalate a space arms race. And they refer to President Macron's announcement that they would establish a aerospace force within the French Air Force. And while that may seem innocuous as well, I think, and just purely a U.S.-European struggle there, it's interesting to note how the Chinese are portraying it. And in the PLA Daily, they have one of their defense experts talk about recent moves of the U.S. government have brought unprecedented uncertainties and insecurity to its NATO allies. And so this is the theme that we see repeatedly in Chinese press, is trying to highlight and promote so-called, differences between the United States and NATO and United States and Europe, and using these differences and talking about alleged moves and things that the U.S. has done, but they don't point to the facts of actually what this administration's done in terms of providing increased spending for European defense, increased exercise activity, increased force presence, the movement of Aegis ashore, the robust exercises in the Baltic and in the Mediterranean. And I think China is its information warfare campaign, its psychological warfare campaign needs to be countered by folks like us that are concerned about Chinese influence and their efforts to destabilize the international order. So anyway, I just appreciate the time to bring these things to your attention. I wish you all the best in your discussions today about other areas of Chinese influence. And thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing more about this. Goodbye from Switzerland.